Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freeness of speech. Benjamin Franklin published those words at just 16 years old. And even at that young age, he understood the first step to tyranny: silence your opposition. Because once they take your voice, everything else comes pretty easy. And that's exactly what the British Empire did throughout the American Revolution. Using seditious libel as their legal foundation, they repeatedly attacked the rights to speak, to print, to assemble, and more. So on this episode, what we now call cancel culture, the founders, the old revolutionaries, they lived it firsthand, and they fought back. But first of all, before getting to that, welcome, and thank you for joining me here on the path to liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Wednesday, May 14th, 2025. And that warning, published by Benjamin Franklin, a young man, in 1722, it wasn't actually new, and it wasn't his own words. It actually was a reprint from Thomas Gordon's widely read Cato's Letter number 15, printed originally in England the year prior. And Gordon saw freedom of speech really as the line in the sand. He put it like this: without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom, and no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech. And Gordon made it brutally clear: silence the people, and liberty dies along with it. He said, freedom of speech is the great bulwark of liberty. They prosper and die together. And in Cato's Letter number 100, his co-author, Gordon's co-author, John Trenchard, he warned that when people are not allowed to communicate their views, communicate their opinions, even as he called wrongly, irreligiously, or seditiously, well, we know what comes next. And he put it like this: the world must soon be overrun with barbarism, superstition, injustice, tyranny, and the most stupid ignorance. And these guys did not hold back at all. He continued, they will know nothing of the nature of government beyond a servile submission to power. And that's why freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and the like, it terrifies people with power. It terrifies empires because it exposes them. And that's exactly what Thomas Gordon said. He said it is the terror of traitors and oppressors and a barrier against them. The crime, of course, was saying or writing or printing or organizing stuff that the government doesn't like, stuff that threatens the government's power or their secrecy. They based it in England on a doctrine called seditious libel, and it did not start in the colonies. It actually goes way, way back to something called the Star Chamber. We've probably all heard the term Star Chamber proceedings, and here from Cornell Law, they explain it. The term derives from the Star Chamber courts of medieval and early modern England, which were at first used to try noblemen too powerful to be brought before common courts. It was actually considered, just a quick aside, it was seen as a positive thing at first because they were going after these people that could not be addressed in their common law courts. But eventually, Cornell Law writes, they became used to suppress anti-monarchical sentiment. Star Chamber courts became seen as unfair, as they consisted of a committee of the King's Council, were conducted in secrecy. So secret courts, a rubber stamp secret court, is not something that you have in a free society. And especially during the reign of Charles I, they used torture to obtain confessions and suppress opposition. And here, as Donald A. Drips points out, in his paper, The Cruel and Unusual Legacy of the Star Chamber, it even really made speech itself a crime. He writes, indeed, Star Chamber could invent crimes and issue prospective decrees. Star Chamber itself, for example, prohibited unlicensed printing. Just a quick aside, reminder that a license from government is a tool that may be used to control you or shut you down in the future. Anyways, Donald continues. Without statutory authority, Star Chamber punished any criticism of itself, however remote from court proceedings, as a contempt. And finally, in 1641, that was the year, after many years of what was considered widely in the public as abuse, Parliament actually finally shut it down. It's called the Act for the Abolition of the Court of Star Chamber. It wiped it off the books completely. It declared that no man shall be punished without due process of law, and declared, quote, the proceedings, censures, and decrees of that court have by experience been found to be an intolerable burden to the subjects, and the means to introduce an arbitrary power and government. And if you know that term arbitrary, that means government just doing things, well, on a whim, whatever it can get away with. Arbitrary power was one of those so-called grievances, injuries, and usurpations in the Declaration of Independence. Now, even after 1641, Star Chamber may have died officially, but judges, even in the common law courts, they continued to use the same legal foundation, the same legal logic, and no case captured the danger of that precedent more than the one regarding a guy named Algernon Sidney, who, he was beheaded. He was put to death, cut his head off, for merely writing but not printing his, what became later famous to the American Revolution, is his book, Discourses Concerning Government. And even in the trial against him, the rules said that they had to have two witnesses, and they only had one. So the judge decided to use the book as a witness. I don't know if they put the book on the stand or what, but the book itself, his manuscript they found in his home, was used as a witness against him. So I covered that in much more detail in another episode a few years ago. Martyr for Liberty, Algernon Sidney, and the American Revolution. That'll be linked to in the show notes. I do hope you check it out. Anyways, let's go fast forward to the American Revolution. And the British were very big fans of this process. Silence your opposition. Shut them down, shut them up, and tell them to stop. And one of the primary ways they did this was by closing or suspending or proroguing or dissolving local assemblies. Now, these were seen by the colonists as an essential voice of the people. It was their tool to voice the views of the people through their local representatives. But the British didn't like some stuff that was going on. I'm not going to get into the background into what led to this. But in the 1767 Townshend Acts, they also passed something called the New York Restraining Act, which not only suspended the legislature or shut down the assembly in New York, but also said basically that their opinions, their publicly passed opinions, which weren't even allowed, if they decided to do it, they were considered null and void. And here from the text of that act, all acts of assembly, orders, resolutions, and votes whatsoever, which shall or may be passed, assented to, or made contrary to the tenor and meaning of this act, shall be and are hereby declared to be null and void, and of no force or effect whatsoever. And in the very first of his widely read, totally famous, not just in the colonies, but also in Europe, Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania, the penman of the American Revolution, John Dickinson, directly addressed the New York Restraining Act, and he warned the rest of the colonies, "You're next." He said, if the Parliament may lawfully deprive New York of any of her rights, it may deprive any or all the other colonies of their rights. And nothing can possibly so much encourage such attempts as a mutual inattention to the interests of each other. In other words, it may not be affecting you in this other colony in Pennsylvania or Georgia or Virginia or Maryland or somewhere else, but if you ignore it, they'll eventually come after you as well. And here's how he put it: to divide and thus to destroy is the first political maxim in attacking those who are powerful by their union. Now, Dickinson sent a copy of his 12 letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania. They ended up becoming the most widely read documents on American liberty until publication of Thomas Paine's Common Sense in January of 1776. Well, right after writing them, he hadn't even had them all published yet. They were published in a series. He sent them to his friend James Otis Jr. in Boston and said, hey, you and the Sons of Liberty were pretty awesome, basically, with your resistance to that Stamp Act. I think we need to really raise some red flags, sound the alarm on these Townsend Acts. And so Otis and Samuel Adams took his advice, and they drafted something called the Massachusetts Circular Letter, which was something that denounced the Townsend Acts as totally unconstitutional. And they were passed by a wide margin on February 11th, 1768. And they quickly spread to all the other colonies. And in the meanwhile, Lord Hillsborough, I think he was the Secretary of State for the colonies, he finally learned of the letter, the circular letter, on April 15th. So a number of weeks later, April 15th, 1768. And just a week later, on April 22nd, he issued a formal directive. They got to rescind this or the assembly gets dissolved. In other words, we don't care what your opinion is. If you don't take back your opinion, you can't even meet anymore. And here's how he put it. It is the king's pleasure that so soon as the general, and this was sent to the governor, it is the king's pleasure that so soon as the general court is again assembled at the time prescribed by the charter, you should require the House of Representatives, in his majesty's name, to rescind the resolution which gave birth to the circular letter from the speaker, and to declare their disapprobation of and dissent to that rash and hasty proceeding. Now, when the assembly came back in session, I think this was at the beginning of June, Governor Bernard followed that order, and he actually told the assembly, hey, here's what you got to do. You got to rescind this thing. And as J.L. Bell points out, it didn't play out the way that the British wanted things to play out. It wasn't even close. He writes, the House was asked whether it would rescind the circular letter as London had ordered. 92 representatives defied the royal orders, and only 17 voted to rescind. And this was one of those rare roll call votes, JL writes, in the colonial house, with every legislator's choice recorded and published. And Governor Bernard, at least from how I've read it, he was pretty stunned by how wide of a margin this rescission thing, they said no to. We're definitely not going to do this. 92-17. He actually wrote in his letter to Hillsborough 91, but the actual recorded vote was 92-17. He said among the majority were many members who were scarce ever known upon any other occasion to vote against the government side of a question. So he's like, man, there's a bunch of people who are always taking the government side, and even on this, they thought it would be so popular, or they were so opposed to the idea of rescinding that they just had no choice. And it was crushed, this idea of rescinding. He said, so greatly has infatuation and intimidation gained ground. Now, Paul Revere, who wasn't just a midnight rider, he was actually a very accomplished, very skilled, and well-known silversmith. He commemorated the event by making this incredible silver bowl, which is known as the Sons of Liberty Bowl. And on it, there's a long inscription, but some key parts. It's inscribed with the quote, to the memory of the glorious 92. You can see it somewhere. I mean, it's probably tough to see on the video, but of course it'll be linked to in the show notes. To the memory of the glorious 92, those 92 who voted not to rescind. Now, Hillsborough went actually so far as to send his own circular letter. He sent one out to all the royal governors throughout the colonies, and he instructed them to shut down any assembly who took a position in support of the Massachusetts circular letter, because he knew it was out there, and he wanted it ignored, and he wanted anyone who took the side of Massachusetts to be punished, basically shut them up. And that actually happened in a number of places. But one that I thought was really interesting was North Carolina, where the royal governor, I think it was Tyranny, off the top of my head, and he actually shut down the assembly preemptively before they ever even took a vote, because he expected expected them to take the side of Massachusetts. So preemptive punishment. And when they came back in session, when they finally were allowed back in session, they did take a position kind of in support, but it wasn't nearly as strong as what some of the revolutionaries wanted. And that probably was the result of what we could call chilling effect on their free speech because of the actions of the royal governor. Now, going to Virginia, they had already passed resolutions in support of Massachusetts pretty quickly in the first half of April of 1768, before the order to shut down all the assemblies had been passed around, before it was even written. So they didn't actually get a chance to get shut down right off the bat. But when they came back into session for the 1769 legislative year, I guess we could call it, they pushed again. And here from Mike Meharry's new article on this important situation, tensions escalated on May 16th when the House of Burgesses passed a resolution declaring the British taxes on the colonies illegal. Actually, all British taxes, but certainly this was in response to the Townshend Acts. Resolved that the sole right of imposing taxes on the inhabitants of this His Majesty's colony and dominion of Virginia is now and ever hath been legally and constitutionally vested in the House of Burgesses. And because of that, it did not take long for the royal governor of Virginia to respond, like one day. And George Washington recorded what happened in his diary for May 17th, 1769. He said, about noon, Speaker Randolph received a message from Governor Bottetour. I learned how to pronounce it from reading, so I probably have that wrong. If you know what it is, I definitely need to learn that one. Commanding the Burgesses to come immediately to the council chamber. He said, I have heard of your resolves. You have made it my duty to dissolve you, and you are dissolved accordingly. Now, I know I'm blasting through a lot of important and sometimes very detailed information in this episode, but hopefully it's at least creating a little bit more interest in case you wanted to research and learn more on your own time. And we do our best to help out with that process because we publish a blog post for every single episode over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. It's all spelled out, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And it doesn't just give you all the different platforms we're on or ways to support our work, but it also, Alan Mosley gets it organized, and he does an awesome job getting that done. And I'll publish it a couple of hours after the live stream is done. But he includes a show links section for every episode that includes all the stuff that I'm mentioning as a resource, whether it's an article or a long essay or paper or a previous episode or original source documents, because I got a bunch of all of that here. Even the Paul Revere image over at the Museum of Fine Art. So you'll find all of that in the show links section. That way you can read, learn more in context on your own time. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. But let's get back to it. Now, we were talking about crackdowns on local colonial assemblies or legislatures that weren't saying and doing things that the British wanted. So shutting down their ability to be a voice of the people. At least that's how it was seen at the time. And of course, this did not go unnoticed. And by 1774, Thomas Jefferson was, well, let's say he was done playing footsie. He was done playing defense with these people. And he laid it all out in his summary view of the rights of British America, which were his intended instructions for Virginia representatives to the First Continental Congress. He wrote, to declare, as their duty required, the known rights of their country, to oppose the usurpations of every foreign judicature, to disregard the imperious mandates of a minister or governor, have been the avowed causes of dissolving houses of representatives in America. And he also took particular aim, just like John Dickinson did a few years earlier, at the New York Restraining Act. And this is how Jefferson put it. One free and independent legislature hereby takes upon itself to suspend the powers of another free and independent as itself, thus exhibiting a phenomenon unknown in nature, the creator and creature of its own power. Now, it didn't end with shutting down assemblies. They went after the press, and pretty aggressively as well. For example, I've got a couple of examples of this. Isaiah Thomas, he was publishing the Massachusetts Spy, I believe starting sometime in 1771. And here from WBUR, it quickly became the most influential channel for spreading revolutionary news and opinion in New England. Of course, as they put, this did not sit well with British authorities who were loyal to the king. They first tried to offer Thomas some honors and awards in the hopes that it would soften his criticism, but he made it clear that he could not be bought. So they tried another kind of sneaky approach on this. They tried to shut him down by having his creditors immediately call in any debt he owed, but he had friends who quickly came to his aid to pay it off and help him avoid foreclosure. And even with this type of a pressure, Isaiah Thomas, the original Isaiah Thomas, well, he didn't back down. Instead, he doubled down. And here's how they put it. When Thomas printed an essay that referred to Lieutenant Governor Andrew Oliver as a perjured traitor, that was a bridge too far, and asserted that Governor Thomas Hutchinson was not the legal governor, that was enough for Hutchinson. I mean, these aren't really wild accusations. To call the lieutenant governor a perjured traitor and the sitting governor not the legal governor would, well, put a target on your back. The governor summoned Thomas to appear before the governor's council 3 times, and each time he did what a free person would do. He refused to appear. They write that Hutchinson then had the council vote to refer the matter to the Attorney General of the province of Massachusetts Bay, who reported directly to the Crown. They wanted to prosecute him, but they couldn't get a jury to, set up an indictment, at least at that point. But at the same time, the Sons of Liberty were pretty concerned. They thought they were definitely coming for him. They tried different approaches that hadn't worked. So they were expecting things to really ramp up. And John Hancock actually really advised him to get rolling. And here from the American Antiquarian Society, which was actually founded by Isaiah Thomas himself, they write, with the encouragement of John Hancock and the help of Joseph Warren, he smuggled his printing press out of the city on April 16th, 1775. Think of the day just before the shot heard around the world on April 16th, 1775, before it could be impounded by the British authorities. And at that point, he escaped to Worcester. I think I'm pronouncing that one correctly, and he continued. And on May 3rd, 1775, I think it was the first thing ever printed in that town, you can see the masthead. A first-hand account of the battles at Lexington and Concord. It says on the top, Americans, liberty or death, join or die. And the same kind of thing was going on down in Virginia as well. In fact, it may have been a little bit more aggressive than what was happening in Massachusetts against freedom of the press. And here from All Things Liberty, this is Gerald Holland's article. On April 20th, 1775, thinking of the timing again on this, John Hunter Holt announced to the public his recent acquisition of the Norfolk newspaper, the Virginia Gazette, or Norfolk Intelligencer. For a newspaper that had only been in print for about a year, if not less, this sudden change in ownership was more than just a business venture. It would serve as an open act of rebellion against Virginia's royal governor, Lord Dunmore. And Holland goes into some great detail of all the various back and forth in the public press that led to, well, we're going to get to this in just a moment. But here's a few highlights. On July 5th, 1775, he published about the seizure of ships and supplies by the British. They just stole a ship, they stole a bunch of supplies, and then they shipped it off to Boston to give to the military there to deal with, well, the Sons of Liberty in Boston. And then on August 23rd, Holt published an account of the quartering of British troops by Dunmore in a warehouse owned by a guy named Andrew Sproul. And in his report, it was stated that Mr. Sproul had protested against the quartering of troops in his property, but, quote, Lord Dunmore paid no attention to his repeated solicitations, but still continued to keep forcible possession for the space of 10 or 12 days. So an attack on private property, quartering of troops in the August 23rd issue. And then on September 9th, Captain Matthew Squire of the HMS Otter. Basically, this guy was Dunmore's lead enforcer. He threatened to basically kidnap Holt. He put it like this: "Sir, you have in many papers lately taken the freedom to mention my name, and thereto added many falsities. I now declare, if I am ever again mentioned therein with any reflections on my character, I will most assuredly seize your person and take you on board the Otter. So if you say anything about me, there isn't going to be a legal response. I'm not going to sue you. I'm going to come and collect you and take you on board this military vessel." And September 20th of 1775 was probably the final straw. And here from Holland's article, in this second to last issue of his paper, Holt published this: "We are informed from good authority that a system of justice similar to that adopted against the devoted town of Boston is likely to be established in this colony by the renowned Commodore of the Virginia fleet." In other words, they were going to shut down the harbor. They were going to have total military control, a siege in Virginia as well. So by September 30th, enough was enough, and Lord Dunmore sent 15 British soldiers to seize everything. All the types, the parts, the entire printing press. And this was done, at least from what I've seen, in the presence of 200 or 300 spectators, just watching it happen out in the broad daylight. And I think it was probably sent to send a message, of course. And a few days later, this is October 5th, 1775, he sent a letter to Hillsborough to explain his views on this situation. He said, "The public prince of this little dirty borough of Norfolk has for some time past been wholly employed in exciting, in the minds of all ranks of people, the spirit of sedition and rebellion by the grossest misrepresentation of facts, both public and private. That they might do no further mischief, I sent a small party on shore on Saturday last at noon, and brought off their press, types, paper, ink, 2 of the printers, and all the utensils, and am now going to have a press for the king." So he's basically taking the position, I stole this stuff, now we're going to use it to push out our own propaganda. I mean, that's a whole nother story, but that was a pretty big deal. Now, it wasn't just the printers, it wasn't just the assemblies they came after. They also came directly after the writers, too. And on May 23rd, 1768, we're backtracking a little bit to just after that Massachusetts circular letter was sent out, which was sent out on the urging of John Dickinson after publishing his Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania, denouncing the New York Restraining Act, denouncing the Townsend duties as unconstitutional and illegal. Well, here on May 23rd, 1768, the royal governor of Georgia, I think it was James Wright, he sent a letter to Hillsborough about those letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania. He said, "Mr. Farmer, I conceive, has most plentifully sown his seeds of faction and sedition, to say no worse. And I am sorry, my lord. I have so much reason to say they are scattered in a very fertile soil. And the well-known author is adored in America. Faction and sedition. That's what they considered opposition, was sedition. Because it undermined how awesome people thought they may have been. It made them look bad. And sometimes it was just telling the truth. Like they stole these ships and they're taking the supplies and they're sending them up to Boston to use against the people there. They don't want anyone to know that kind of stuff. And throughout the height of the American Revolution, prior to the War for Independence, probably no one lit the flame, no one lit the fire more than John Dickinson, the penman of the American Revolution. He wrote a ton of stuff over the years, including his broadside urging non-compliance and resistance to the Stamp Act of 1765. He was a lead author of the Declaration and Resolves of the First Continental Congress in 1774. This was basically an early Bill of Rights by United Colonies at that point. He also co-authored with Thomas Jefferson the Declaration of the Causes and Necessity of Taking Up Arms, which was in the aftermath of Lexington and Concord, and of course his letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania, which were opposing the Townsend Acts, including the New York Restraining Act, and they warned, long before many others did, that even the smallest violation of rights is a precedent for more and more violations and larger ones in the future. And here from my article on Dickinson from a while back, the British thought John Dickinson was enemy number one. And now near the end of 1777, I think this is October, when they took Philadelphia, probably the Battle of Germantown, Dickinson narrowly escaped with his family before the British burned his estate to the ground. John Adams pointed out that the British at that time thought Dickinson was, quote, the ruler of America. Man, the founders definitely understood. The founders, the old revolutionaries understood. Where there's free speech, free press, freedom of assembly, tyranny has no place to hide. It may get away with stuff still, but it has no place to hide. And if you want to stop a revolution before it starts, empires always want to silence the voices that might lead that revolution. Now, I think it's no surprise why we don't learn much of this stuff at all in the government-run schools. And that's a big part of the reason why we work so hard every single day to reach and teach more and more people with this essential and long-forgotten and ignored history. And nothing helps us do this work more than the financial faith and support of our members. You can join us for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. We also have annual, 5-year, and lifetime options. So if you got a few bucks of that dirty government fiat that's quickly devaluing day in and day out, year in and year out, please consider throwing it our way over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. And if you don't want to become a member, that's cool too, but you still want to support us financially, you can definitely do that. Or if you already are a member, that's even more awesome. Thank you very much. And you want to support us additionally, you can do that as well. Again, no pressure on any of this. I just want to make sure you're aware of how you can pull it off if you want to do it. You can do that over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/donate. There's also a bunch of free and easy peasy things you can do to help us spread the word, primarily by triggering the algorithms of these mainstream platforms, like watch time percentage on a video platform. If it's a 10-minute video and you watch 8 minutes, that's 80%. But if you watch, 15 minutes, that's 150% and way better for the algo. You can also leave reviews on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast platforms. Subscribe, get notifications, hit the like button, comments in the archive, all that stuff. I'm very grateful for any consideration you can give to supporting us financially, otherwise, or a combination, whatever works best for you. I'm actually more grateful that you're still here throughout all this detailed information. I really appreciate you spending some of your time with me today. I hope this was interesting. I hope it was fun to watch or listen to from time to time. But more important than anything, I hope it made you think, and I hope you learned something. Again, thank you so much for spending some of your time with me today. I look forward to seeing you next time here on the Path to Liberty.